Perek Zayin Mishna Beis. This Mishnah discusses a counter to a kira, a counter to an oven. Look at this beautiful picture here where you have a kira, which has two burners on it. And then after you finish cooking your soup, you have an easy area, an easy sort of shelf or counter that's built onto the kira to place your pot. And since this shelf doesn't really assist the cooking process, it's considered a whole separate base kibble, a whole separate vessel. So even though it's connected, it's considered two separate vessels. And if the oven becomes tameh, the shelf remains tahor. And if the shelf becomes tameh, the oven remains tahor. They're considered two completely separate vessels because each one does not assist the other. Now this shelf is called a dachone, a shelf. Let's read the Mishnah. Dachone, a shelf, for counter space, sheyeshbo base kibble, that has a base kibble that has walls around it. It has some form of cavity. For kederos, for pots, it's tahor mishum kira. It's tahor from the tumah of a kira, meaning it's completely separate from the kira. If the kira becomes tameh, then it remains tahor. V'tameh mishum klei kibul, but it's susceptible to tumah because of its own klei kibul, because it has its own cavity. It's considered a whole separate vessel. It has its own individual cavity. Now the Mishnah gets into the nitty-gritties of this dachone, of this shelf. Now hatstadin shelo, the walls, the sides, the walls of the shelf, hanogeya bahem, if food touches it, eino tameh mishum kira. The food doesn't become tameh because of the tumah of the kira. As we said, that if the kira is tameh, the shelf remains tahor, and therefore if food touches the walls of the shelf, even if the kira is tameh, the food remains tahor. But harachav shelo, but what about the rachav? The rachav is the wall of the kira that acts as the wall of the shelf. Meaning, look at the picture, this area, which is really acting as a wall to the shelf, has its own might have its own status. We're going to see it's a machlokes. Do we consider it part of the kira and it will become tameh with the kira? Or maybe we'll consider it part of the shelf and it will become tameh with the shelf. So the Mishnah clarifies, harachav shelo, the rachav, the width of the walls of the kira, Rabbi Meir mitaher. Rabbi Meir says it's tahor from the tumah of the kira, meaning it's considered part of the shelf. It's not part of the kira. It's tahor from the kira. Because Rabbi Meir compares it to the case, I think it was in Perek Vav somewhere, that if you have two stones or three stones, which is acting as two separate ovens, and you'll put the fire in between each one. So if one of the ovens becomes tameh, the other one remains tahor. And the middle stone, how do we judge the middle stone? So we split the middle stone in two. The part of the stone that's being utilized by the tameh oven is tameh, and the part of the stone that's being utilized by the tahor oven remains tahor. So too here, this wall of the kira is being utilized by two separate utensils: the oven, and it's also being utilized by the dachone, by the shelf. And therefore, we'll have to split the wall. The outer wall will consider part of the shelf, and the inner wall will consider part of the stove. That's Rabbi Meir's shita. But Rabbi Yehuda argues, look at the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda mitame. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's tameh. It's part of the oven because we can't consider the outer wall as part of the shelf. I mean, the shelf is clearly just a secondary utility to the main oven. The oven is the main thing over here. And therefore, the outer wall of the oven is considered part of the oven. We can't consider it part of the wall of the shelf. That's just the secondary usage of it. Now, the Mishnah ends off with a new case. V'chein, and similarly, hakofes asal, someone who flips over a basket, v'ose al gabov, and he places on top of the basket a kira, an oven. So here's the picture. We have a basket here that someone flipped over, and you put on a base, and on the base you've placed on an oven. So the heat of the oven won't burn the basket because it's on a base. And the basket is very wide, and you could place a pot, after you're finished cooking on it, you could place the pot on top of the basket, and you could use it for your extra counter space. And the question is this basket considered part of the oven because it's being utilized as counter space right off of the oven? And the Mishnah is ruling that no, they're considered two completely separate vessels. The wooden basket is susceptible to tumah like wooden utensils, and it's makabel tumah individually, and the stove is makabel tumah on its individual status also. So as the Mishnah says, v'chein, and similarly, hakofes asal, one who flips over a basket, v'ose al gab of kira, and he builds on top of it a kira oven, they're still considered two completely separate vessels, and they're therefore susceptible to tumah individually. Now it's your turn to read the Mishnah.